With 4 points from the last 2 games for Stoke, we've seen quite a fairly consistent side from Mark Robins' men, but with that, we've got 2 huge games coming up in 1 week, both against Luton and Cardiff. Now up first, a midweek tie, you feel that changes might be made for this one, but how many will Mark Robins look to make? With that, let's get predicting Stoke's starting 11 to take on Luton. Now, Mark Robins made 3 changes for the QPR game and then only 1 change in that Preston draw. And I think it's one where, since obviously coming in, when he first came in, it was one where there were so many injuries for Mark Robins to deal with. We had the likes of Gallagher and Manouf unavailable. Now he's got his kind of best 11. I think he knows exactly who's going to work for him, who's the best players in that position, and who, for these final 6 games, he will have consistent performances from. And I think, don't get me wrong, in that Preston game, the game was there for the taking. And if we won it, fantastic. But we haven't lost it. And it's, yes, a point gained, but obviously 2 points lost as well. And I think Stoke were the better side. And I think if we went on to win that game, you probably wouldn't have argued. But in terms of the penalty getting given for Stoke, was it a penalty? I don't think it was. But that's probably one of the first times this season we've actually seen a decision go in the opposite direction and in for Stoke instead of going against Stoke. But with that, in terms of Mark Robins and the changes for this one, it's a double header of games. I know it's quite cliche and I know it's quite stating the obvious, but it is 2 cup finals. These are 2 teams that are below us, and at the end of the day, these final 6 games comes down to, is there going to be 3 worse teams than Stoke that get less points? And Stoke have been putting in more consistent performances, 4 points from the last 2 games. We want to build from that, and a home fixture against Luton is exactly where we should kind of show that, and I think there will be changes made. So with that, I think Mark Robins will look at this one and say there's a couple of players that maybe have made substitute appearances that possibly could start in this one, but it's whether he's going to get a consistent performance from them instead of him playing them or starting them and having to bring them off at half time. I think that's the decision that he's going to make for this one. Now, in terms of team news, we obviously saw Wouter Berger come off in the Preston game. Luckily, as Mark Robins said, it was cramp and no injury there, which is great news to hear as well. Of course, one where he's been our key player. You look at it, and in terms of the chances that were created in that Preston game, quite a number of the times it's where Berger gets on the ball and plays it out wide, and obviously we get the wingers and the full-backs involved. And you know what, I think that midfield with Thompson or Pearson either side of Berger and obviously Baker ahead of him, I think it's just working so nicely, and I think that's one of the decisions that Mark Robins will make for this game as well. Al Hamadi, another one, came off the bench to replace Jun Ho on a 62nd minute, something like that, in the Preston game, obviously coming back from that injury. Great to see him back, and I think he'll be another one that's knocking on the door for this one. And then finally, for this game, obviously we saw the likes of Gooch and Gibson back on the bench for the Potters. I think it's just well-experienced players that we need. You look at it, and in some of these games, maybe even against Luton on Tuesday, we might go 1-0 up or we might go 2-0 up, and we need to see out the game. The likes of Lyndon Gooch, who knows exactly how the Championship works and how to see out games, is exactly what we need. So with that, they're all the team news that, as far as I'm aware, is going to come out, and fingers crossed there's no injury updates with that, and obviously it's only Ender Stevens and Wilson Esbrand who are the injured players at the moment for the Potters. So with that, Mark Robins has got a couple of decisions to make, so let's get talking about it. So coming in to this game, starting 11 wise, it is the big question of how much of the side will Mark Robins look to rotate. I think it's one where he, as we mentioned, he knows what his best 11 is, but with a midweek tie and then obviously a game against Cardiff away on the weekend as well, you don't want to kind of push the players too much. And obviously with him coming in and knowing exactly how many players were injured beforehand, he obviously will know who can kind of last these 2 games and who maybe needs to get rotated. And it's not a case of being dropped, it's more rotation, freshening up the side, but also maintaining that consistent performance. He's been into this game, obviously Victor Johansson in goal. Back 4, I'm looking at this one, would you make any changes at all? And I think it is more of a case of, is there many changes to be made? I think it is one where you keep the same back 4. So you'd have Bocat and Shamadou as your 2 fullbacks who've had absolutely fantastic games. I think against QPR were absolutely fantastic. Obviously Shamadou getting on the score sheet. Bocat as well equally was fantastic. And I think, you know what, if they can have that freedom in this one where we are against wing backs in Luton's side, where there will be the space out wide, and the width is where Stoke could stretch this Luton side and have their joy. They will equally have to do the defensive side. So I think obviously having Bocat and Shamadou could work really well again, like it did against QPR. And then the strong centre-back partnership of Phillips and Wilmot. I think it is one where they're going to be your centre-back partnership till the end of the season now. And I think it's one where Phillips, next season, it'll be really interesting to see where he goes. And obviously, you'd love for him to come back to Stoke, but I don't think he will. I think it's obviously one where he's going to kick on from there, and he's shown exactly what he's made of. And I think that partnership of Wilmot and Phillips has been very solid, if I'm being totally honest. I can't see any changes being made to that back four. Now, in terms of a midfield, I think this is the first area where Mark Robins might look to make a decision now. We obviously saw the one change in that Preston game was Thompson coming in for Ben Pearson. I think it is one where that could be then looked at again. And I think I really like Jordan Thompson. And I think recently, in the Preston game and in the Millwall game, man's gone blank then, Preston and Millwall game, I think he was just, he loves to get on the ball and move it. And I get that some fans will say he's a little bit slow at times on that, but it's just slowing it down. And I think at times, don't get me wrong, obviously there's times where Stoke players have moved the ball slowly and we haven't been quick enough with how we pass, but the amount of things that Thompson does where he gets on the ball and just tries to either get the fullbacks involved or whoever, he gives the likes of Wouter Berger that freedom, as well as Ben Pearson, who also does that, to just get on the ball. And I think what I like with Thompson is he's obviously, like Baker, is obviously going to be playing for a contract for next season. It's interesting to see whether Mark Robins sees him in his plans for next season, but I think he's definitely showing what he's made of. And don't get me wrong, I think obviously a lot of the players could have shown it more this season. However, there's a lot more stuff that's going on than just the players that are at fault for what's happened this season. So with that, with Ben Pearson, obviously was the only change, and Mark Robins mentioned that there was player that was ill and obviously was only coming back towards the later stages of last week, and obviously was kind of less in contention to start again. You presume that was Ben Pearson. So I think for this one, midweek tie, at home, I think Ben Pearson had an absolute class game against QPR. It was absolutely fantastic. So maybe I'd rotate him out. So I'd bring Thompson out and then put Pearson in and have Pearson and Berger as your midfield. But if it was Thompson and Berger as well, you'd have no complaints again. I think, you know what, I think Pearson and Thompson complement each other in terms of being a very similar player. And then I think what they do in terms of the role that they play that correlates to how Berger plays and the freedom he has to get on the ball and have that kind of expression of play, I think is just really nice as well. And I think that's what Mark Robins sees. It'll just be interesting to see whether he wants to switch it up and have Pearson come in for this one, or you'll keep with Thompson. And then in that number 10 role, who had an absolutely fantastic game against Preston and equally against QPR. And you know what, just does not stop running. The way he's playing and the way he's just kind of impacting the games, obviously scored the penalty against Preston to clinch us a point. It's Lewis Baker, and I think the way he plays and everything about him at the moment has been absolutely fantastic. And it really does beg the question, why did we let him go out on loan? I'm not too sure. I really aren't too sure why we did. And I think it was one where last season and the season before, what we saw with Baker was he's a player that can give you that moment of magic. There's a number of times, I think last season we saw it with the free kick against Rotherham. Great free kick that obviously won us the game and got us to 3 points. He's someone like, say, Manu that can give you them moments of brilliance. And don't get me wrong, I think at times him and, say, Josh Laurent at times had performances that weren't as consistent as what they can do. But this season, especially since coming back, he's worked his hardest. I think he's already shown that number 10 role's his own, and I can't see him, like, say, your centre-back partnership possibly coming out. I think obviously you've got the likes of Andrew Moran who could play there. John Ho if he was to move into the 10, but we haven't really seen that done under Mark Robins. So for me, Lewis Baker's still in the place. Works so well, and I think he's just made that role his own. Whether that's on the ball or off the ball, everything he does, I think, would have really pleased Mark Robins. And I think if he wanted to stay for another season or whatever and wants to obviously work his way for a contract at the club, I think Mark Robins will be looking at it and say, yeah, I think he's a player that we could kind of build around. In terms of wingers, I think it's one where I think that at the moment, Jun Ho and Manouf, especially against QPR, were absolutely fantastic. We're really, really solid. Obviously, Manouf getting his goal. Jun Ho as well getting his goal, as well, scoring the first. I just think they were absolutely magic at home to QPR. And then against Preston, we didn't see too much of them. Don't get me wrong, we did see bits and bobs of them, but I think it was one where they could have impacted the game a little bit more, and maybe that's where we could have got over the line against them and possibly got the 3 points away from home. But I do think that for this one, with the midweek tie, what you don't want to do is obviously make them go, oh, that I feel like you could probably give me a more consistent performance at the moment, but can you do that in 2 games in 1 week? I think that this could be the time where we see Louis Kumas come back in. And I think it is one where he'll come in for either Manouf or Jun-Ho. And I'm going to go for Jun-Ho coming out. So I'll put Kumas on the left, Manouf on the right. And I think having the option of Jun-Ho off the bench could be absolutely like a game changer. I think if the game's not going the way, I think it is one where having Jun-Ho off the bench could be just that little moment of brilliance, that little moment of magic that gets us over the line in this game that could be quite tight. Obviously, it might be quite a cagey affair. Having him off the bench could obviously be a difference maker. But with that, I think Kumas coming in, another one that obviously, I think at the moment, Jun-Ho and Manouf have been your more consistent performance. But I think that with against Luton, who obviously are going to play a 3 at the back, and obviously have wing backs as well, width is a key one. And if he can find a space to drive and get on the ball and actually go at his defenders, we've seen it a number of times where Kumas can do that and just take on his man. But have we seen that enough? It's tough, and I think when it's his first loan, especially in the Championship, it's always going to be a tough one. But it could be one where he doesn't want to risk it. It might be one where he says to Kumas, if I start you, I don't want to be bringing you off after 45 minutes. Show me what you're made of. Well, we've seen glimpses of what Kumas has got, the potential he's got, but in games like these, in absolutely huge games, can you not be risking it, but can you be making them rotated changes where for a first half, we haven't threatened them enough or equally as enough as what we've done in, say, the QPR game or the Preston game as well. So, but with that, I am going to go for Kumas and Miljan Manouf. And then leading the line, this is the tricky one as well. You've got Gallagher, who started the past 2 games. For me, I've enjoyed his performances. I think it's one where, don't get it wrong, he obviously would have liked to have more opportunities and maybe having shots on goal and all that. But the impact he has, and I think obviously being a bit of a nuisance to defenders, he did that massively against the QPR backline. I think obviously against Preston, he did that as well, but obviously moved to the left and obviously then got brought off as well. I think that because of obviously being a midweek game and 2 games in 1 week, I think we'll see Al Hamady come back in. Obviously another player that's been absolutely fantastic since joining, and I think one where for this game could be give us something a little bit different. Obviously, like what Gallagher is, an absolute nuisance to defenders. But I think maybe he might have a little bit more opportunities. And I think where we're rotating side, and I think with Gallagher as well, obviously we've seen the amount of injuries he's had this season, and not obviously pushing him and saying, right, I need you to start again, I need you to start again. I think switching it up and Al Hamady coming in, I don't think we lose any quality. I think it's one where, you know what, right, it's going to be a very strong team. And I think the rotated changes that have been made are ones that won't weaken the side at all, give you the strength, but will be one where they need to bring that consistent performances that, of course, the Stoke team has been putting out. So there we have it then. That's what I'm going to go for. A big starting 11 to start against Luton. I think it is one where will Mark Robins actually look to make any changes? I think in terms of if it's an unchanged 11 that obviously came from that Preston game and got a draw, you go, you know what, I don't mind that at all. I think that's a really good side. But I think there's players that we've got on the bench, the likes of Al Hamady, the likes of Pearson, that could come in, that maintain that side, that have shown what they're made of, and obviously can have an impact in these games. And I think it's one where, if it's a cagey affair, having the likes of Pearson on the pitch or having the likes of Al Hamady on the pitch that can hold up the play, that can kind of calm and bring that little calm in terms of in front of a home crowd and maybe get you off the seat with the likes of with the likes of Manouf as well. I think it is one where that's what we kind of need in this one as well. So with that, that's what I'm going to go for. Let me know what side you go for and if you make any changes if you were the manager for this starting 11. So with that, that's what I'm going to go for. Hopefully a big 3 points against Luton on Tuesday. But until then, I'll see you guys next time.